Now, in the previous videos, we created this sales volume year on year. And let's say we've got a target for the number of houses, number of apartments or flats to increase, the number of sales to go up by 5 to 10% each year. We can add lines onto our visualizations. In older versions of Power BI, you went to the visualization pane and then the third icon, Analytics. In more recent versions, it's in the Format pane. So here we have a constant line. I'm going to expand this and add one. So I'm going to add one at 5%, or maybe I'll add one at 10%. And I don't just put the value being 10 because the computer will interpret that as being 1000%. So instead I need to say 0.1. So we can change the options as well. For example, I want it in black, transparency of 50%, yeah, that's okay. I could have it solid or dotted, but actually I prefer the dash. I could have it in front of the bars or behind the bars. And then I can add a data label. So let's add a data label as well. It's right there, blue on blue, so you can't see it. So I'll change it to black. There, we can see it now. And it's on the left-hand side, and it's above the line. Right, let's add a second line. So first of all, let's rename this. So I double-click inside of it and say the 10% line. So there we go. So let's add another one. So this is going to be the 5% line, so the value is 0.05. Again, change it to black. And I'll have my data label as well, a black data label, but this is going to be below the line rather than above. So we can see there's the range. And that line remains the same relative position, 10% or 5%, regardless of whether I change the dates or change what level of the hierarchy I'm looking at. Right, let's add another one, which is going to be right at the minimum we've got. So what's this? 48.82%. Okay, so let's add this. So this is the minimum. So this is going to be minus 0.48. And there is our line. And we'll just make it just fractionally lower. Now the problem is, when I get into the deeper levels of the hierarchy, this is no longer going to be the minimum. When I go across 2008, you can see for about half a year, the sales on sales negative growth was much more than that. So I can't just say, give me a value and I can use it, because that value and the data might change, leading to that value no longer being correct. So let's remove that one particular line. I'll click an X next to it. And I'm going to, instead of adding a constant line, I'm going to add a minimum line. And the minimum line is not there. And the reason it's not there is because I'm using a stacked chart. So if you're using any of the stacked charts, a stacked area, bar, column, or 100% stacked bar or column chart, or a waterfall chart, then you can only use a constant line. So the thing about a stacked chart is it's lots of bars on top of each other. Let's change that to a clustered chart where if, for instance, we were having all of the areas, they wouldn't be on top of each other, as you can see here, but they'll be side by side. Now, with a stacked visualization, I've only got the one option, the constant line. However, with a clustered chart, I have many more. We have a minimum line. So now we can see our minus 48%, but then when we get in deeper, it seems to go all the way down to minus 100 because these final 2 months don't have actually any sales figures. So needless to say, the amount of sales is 100% down on the previous year. But it recalculates according to the data that is showing. We have a max line. So just like the min, here is our max, and again, when we drill down, the figure changes. So here it's just under 70%, whereas here it's around 25%. There were certainly some really hot ones. We have an average line, so the average is still positive. We have median line. So the first average is the mean, the second is the one in the middle, and we have a percentile. So we can see those values which are at the top 90%, so not the top 100%, which would be the maximum, but then all of those which are in the top 90%. So in other words, any values which are above here are in the top 10%. And similarly, we could have the bottom 10%. So any values below this line are in the bottom 10%. So you can see it's really this a small bit here and a fair bit here in the last 2 months. Now there are other lines available. If you have a scatter chart, then you can have not just a single constant line, but you can have a constant on the x-axis and a constant on the y-axis. So let's just take a quick example of that. So here we have a scatter chart, and we're going to be looking at the number of sales, or maybe the price for semi-detached compared to detached houses, and over time. So here we can say I want an x-axis line, so I want a line at 300,000, for instance. There's my line. Now this can also be useful to force a different color for 0. So for instance, suppose I wanted a dotted line at the 0 axis. This is another way of doing this, 0 value. Similarly, I can do this for the y-axis as well. So there we have another value line. And there's also something called symmetry shading. So what this is doing is it's putting a diagonal line. So each of these points are points of equal value. So this point here is 200,000 on the y-axis and 200,000 on the x-axis. So you can see all of those things below that line and all of the things above that line. And then there's also a ratio line. So suppose you didn't want it to have a line at equal value. So here we have these being at equal value. Instead, this line plots the totality, the sum of the subtotal of the x-axis against the subtotal of the y-axis to come up with some sort of ratio, a different slope rather than 1 for 1. And additionally, one more, if this were for example, a simple line graph, then we would have another measure that we can use for line, and that is a forecast. So we've got it so far up to 2016. What could it be in the future? And so this is a fairly wide variety, but if I go down to the months, you can see this is what the computer is expecting. This is a central forecast, and these are the outer bounds of the forecast. And I can say, well, actually, these last 2 points, they're not significant. Ignore these last 2 points. And click apply. And this is a more realistic forecast of where the future might be. I have a trend line, so we can see how we are doing over time. So here you can see we start off relatively good over time, and then it gets seemingly getting worse. So this is a line of best fit, in other words. So these are the analysis or analytical lines. They can be used in most visualizations. They can't be used in combination charts, like for instance the line and cluster chart, or the line and stacked column chart. It can't be used in ribbon charts, can't be used in funnel charts, and can't be used in other things like you might expect, like pie charts, tables, gauges, donut charts, and matrices. So if you are using these stack charts, you will have access to just one, the constant line. If you're using other types of visualizations, you might have trends, min, max, average, median, percentiles, and forecast, with some special ones for scatter graphs. And you can access these in the older version of Power BI through the analytics icon in the visualization pane, and in more recent versions